For almost 3 decades, Eric Rosen has been one of the most influential artistic leaders in American regional theater. He co-founded Chicago's About Face Theater, a groundbreaking LGBTQ+ theater company, and later led Kansas City's Repertory Theater for a decade, helping transform it into a nationally recognized incubator for new work and productions that went on to Broadway and major stages around the country. In 2023, Rosen took on a new challenge, becoming artistic director of the historic Cape Playhouse as it moves towards its centennial in 2027. In his 3 years at the Playhouse, Eric has brought a new artistic vision to one of Cape Cod's most venerable cultural institutions, staging ambitious seasons, attracting major Broadway talent, expanding programming, and working to build new audiences while honoring the theater's extraordinary history. In this interview, I talk with Eric about his remarkable career, his vision for the future of the Cape Playhouse, and the role his own life and experiences as a gay man, husband, and father have played in shaping him as an artistic leader. Eric Rosen, welcome to Profiles in LGBTQ+ Courage. Thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to have you here. I have to tell you, my husband John and I saw Hairspray a couple of weeks ago, and we were in the front row, and we saw you giving a talk and a pitch, and I turned to John and I said, he's a great salesperson for the theater. And it was a great show, and there's a lot I want to get into with you today, but I think I'd like to start by having you talk a little bit about how do you put on a show like Hairspray? I mean, from an artistic and logistical point of view, what's involved?
Well, everything. I mean, it's the work we're doing at the Playhouse, so that listeners know, we are a summer stock theater, the oldest continuously operating summer theater in the United States. It's my 3rd season there. And we do these increasingly large shows under my leadership. Big shows yield big audiences. And as we are approaching our 100th birthday next year, I've really been focusing on what are shows that'll get a lot of people in and build the enthusiasm for an institution that has had this very storied history, but had some, really hard times as recently as a few years ago when there was a chance the theater would close as recently as 2019. So they brought me in to try to turn it around. And my agenda is to do great big shows on this summer stock schedule, which means the actors in New York have 11 rehearsals, and then they come to the Cape on a Sunday, and we start performances on Wednesday. So we have almost no time to do these extremely ambitious Broadway-scale shows. And planning it is a logistical nightmare in that every minute that goes by from the day the last show ends till the Wednesday that they open is precious. And so really, a SWAT team of people coordinating and thinking through and planning and monitoring the clock and making sure that all the lights get set, the sets get built, the things get hung, and that the actors are ready. And and Hairspray is the largest show we think we've ever done. It's 26 actors, huge sets. It's big. And my goal is that the audience has no idea how ridiculous it is that we pulled it off. That's what we're doing.
From a management and artistry standpoint, how do you motivate actors to show up as their best?
You give them a job. Married to an actor. The Playhouse contract is really, it's a high prestige job in New York for a thing to do in the summer. So actors bring their best selves. Also, it's a vacation for them in a way. They come to the Cape, and this has been true for 100 years, that actors from New York come and they do shows 8 times a week, but they're also going to the beach every day, and they are bringing their families and their pets, and their friends are coming to visit them, and that it is a really joyful contract for our actors, and people bring their best selves to it, and they want to be good, but there's no consequence to it, by which I mean the New York Times isn't coming. No one's career is made or broken based on how it goes. So what I love about it, the environment we provide for our actors, is there's a sense of playfulness and joy and summer that the Cape offers that is unique. It's unlike anything I've ever done before, any theater I've ever worked at, that we market in happiness.
I love that. And this is a very storied Playhouse. Can you talk about some of the people who have performed on those boards over the years?
Oh, it'll take the rest of our time. It's an amazing history. The theater was founded in 1927 by a guy named Raymond Moore, who had been up with O'Neill in Provincetown and came down and bought this piece of land and landed this theater on it with this the 1920s idea of getting artists into communities outside of New York. And it really was the first time that in America, someone had created theater spaces outside of the city for the cultivation of the artistry and also the cultivation of audiences. So the history that happened in the next 10 or 15 years included Betty Davis and Humphrey Bogart and Henry Fonda and Tallulah Bankhead and on, later Gertrude Lawrence. Jane Fonda did a show there with her dad in the 50s, all the way through. Some of the greatest performers who've ever lived have been on that stage. And whenever I stand there and give that speech, I think about Thornton Wilder standing there and doing Our Town the summer after he won the Pulitzer. And I don't know, some of the ghosts are truly incredible, and that legacy is living because our actors come, and every time a show closes, I say, you've now entered our history. Like we've written the next chapter with every production and every summer, and it's a cool thing to be a part of. It really is.
I'm sure. And do any of the actors who come in ever note that the board's grown with the ghosts of actors past?
Every opening night we do a thing we call it the Gertrude Lawrence ceremony. Gertrude Lawrence was one of the biggest stars of the 30s and 40s, and she came to the Playhouse in 1939, married the managing director, and spent the next 12 years jumping back from London and New York to the Cape. And she died tragically during the run of The King and I. And we say she haunts the theater because she does. And we put a vase of blue hydrangeas in her star dressing room where Julie Andrews filmed a movie about her. So there's a photo of Julie Andrews being Gertrude Lawrence in the dressing room with a photo of Gertrude Lawrence next to it. And we take a moment on every opening night. We just think about, let's think about not just the hundreds, if not thousands of actors who've done what we're doing right now, but every person who's run tech, every costume person, every scenic designer, every apprentice, the thousands and thousands of theater makers who have done exactly what we're doing. And the actors take a moment and really take in that sense of, our place in that history, and our sense of our connection to our theatrical ancestors is the most moving moment, I think, for the actors in the process. Is really, how often do we feel that we're stepping into history? You know what I mean? And in a place that is so rich with it.
Yeah. In your role, are you actively involved with every show in working with actors on a daily basis, blocking scenes?
No, I direct one of the plays each summer, and that's plenty. I'm involved in all the casting for all the shows. I select all the directors. I approve the designs. If it happens on stage, ultimately I'm responsible for it. But I hire incredible directors who, I'll give notes or suggestions during the process. But generally, I hire people that I trust, and they deliver great work. And that's to be a good artistic director means knowing the tension between what you can contribute and what you are asking of really great artists to do. To me, it's helped by the fact that I've been directing my whole life and writing plays, and I've been artistic directed by some of the greats. And I know what is enough to provide in terms of feedback. And I also know that everything gets set the year before when you choose the play, that once the die is cast, it's cast.
You have a long history and career in regional theater. I know you were in Chicago and also in Kansas City. Talk a little bit about your background in the roles that you held in those cities and how they inform your leadership, your artistic leadership here today.
Yeah, it's been an interesting few decades. I started out very young. I went to Northwestern to get my doctorate and thought I was going to be an academic. And in the middle of that process, after I'd finished all my coursework, I had a big crush on a guy who wanted to start a theater company, and we started About Face Theater, which is now celebrating 31 years, which is crazy, which is a queer-focused theater in Chicago that we started in 1995. And I was artistic director at About Face till 2008, and built that theater from really just me and my friends wanting a place to do some shows to a community institution that advanced LGBTQ issues and still does in a way that was the most meaningful. In terms of what I've contributed to the world, I think my 13 years leading About Face were the most meaningful in terms of being both in the streets as an activist and being on the stage as a theater maker, and knowing that those two things were actually the same was an incredible period of my life. And I really cherished those experiences and those memories, and the sense that we were doing something very good for the world was a joy and a struggle, and so hard. And then I ran Kansas City Rep for 10 years, where I met my husband, who's the actor Claiborne Elder. And we did Kansas City Rep, which was very different, running a large regional theater that was approaching its 50th birthday when I got there, and helping to transform that place into an important regional was also challenging, really interesting. And ultimately, after my son was born in 2017, I thought I was done running theaters. I'd done it for 20 years or something, and 25 years, God. And my kid was born, and we just wanted to be back in New York. We'd always split our time between Kansas City and New York, Clay and I. And when Bo was born, I gave up the Rep and moved to New York, and thought, well, I'm not going to be an artistic director ever again. And then the pandemic hit, and I had some which for us was kind of wonderful. We had a couple of years just being dads, which was really fun, terrifying, not having a paycheck, but it was a good time to have a 2 and 3-year-old. And then this opportunity presented itself, and I wasn't looking for a job running a theater again. I didn't think I would do it, and I'm very happy with my freelance life and my writing life. And but there was something about this that tugged at me because of the 100th anniversary. That was really being an academic and being thinking about things in the broad historical scheme. I thought it would be fun to turn it around, and also have a great place for my son to spend the summers. And as New Yorkers, to be paid to be able to go away for the summer is pretty awesome.
Yeah, not bad.
It's not a bad gig. It's a really fun gig. So yeah, that's a kind of overview of what I've done.
What are the challenges that regional theater in general, what are the challenges that such theaters face today? And what are the particular challenges relative to Cape Playhouse in terms of the audience for shows and the demographics on the Cape?
Well, in a way, those two questions are diametrically opposed to each other, because what's happening in the state of the field, and I could go on for days, is a massive shrinking of the audience, shrinking of funding, and a real crisis for these institutions that were built in the 60s and 70s on one financial model that has collapsed. And so my peers running theaters like Kansas City Rep are, it's a struggle, really is. It's a very dark time for the larger American theater. And what's happening for us at the Cape Playhouse is, I'll get in trouble for saying it, but it's the opposite. Where the theater is booming. I mean, we've more than doubled in 2 years. The staff has tripled. The audience is up 50%, if not sometimes. We had 38 sold out shows in a 540 seat house this summer. It's crazy, and it's been like that, for the last couple of years. So we're building momentum, we're building excitement, and it feels like the return to a golden age for the Playhouse. And part of that is because the nature. When I took the job, I thought, well, I have to do shows that will get people off the beach in the summer, that will be the equivalent of pleasure reading or beach reading, that the joy and the pleasure of going to the Playhouse, which is such a beautiful and iconic place, has to be matched by work on stage that will meet the audience where they are, which means being much more like a commercial producer and really thinking what's going to sell, what's the best work that we can do with the best possible artists that will also fill the house night after night. And that was I've never done anything like it. The work in Kansas City was really focused on new play development and on partnerships with theaters in other cities and getting stuff to Broadway. The work at About Face was focused on really advancing the agenda around what we could say as queer people and queer artists. And here, really is a question of how do we build an institution to last another 100 years, an institution that was nearly lost. And it's just 3 different challenges, really.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about the audience here on Cape. What have you learned about them, or what are you aware of as you think of staging shows and bringing performances in?
Well, when you see the numbers go from 30,000 people in the summer to 55 or 60,000, there is no core audience anymore because that's a lot more people. And every night I give a curtain speech every night, which is actually in my contract, which is very smart to my board, because I'm a good salesman, I just say how many subscribers, and our subscription base has grown by 45%. So there are a lot of people who raise their hands. And second question is, who's new? And almost as many people raise their hands when I ask who's new. And first-time attendees, show after show, I don't know who they are. I can tell that they're younger. I can tell that there are more families. I can tell that there are a lot more Gen Xers and the children of the subscribers who are now taking their place as the adults in the room, so to speak. There are a lot more. We have so many Broadway stars in our shows that there's a lot of like Broadway fans coming from New York and Boston. People are starting to come from Provincetown. I can always now count the gays. Which went from like none to,
Yes.
to some. We went from none to some. And it's really is, I think I'm asking the questions that Broadway producers ask, which is how do we find the next audience? How do we generate shows that you feel that you can't miss for one reason or another? And that attracts more and more people who are more and more different. I think as the Cape changes, the audience changes too, because we now have a very healthy core of retirees who are the people who've come to the Cape, and the year-round population has grown a lot, and they're our core audience now in June and September. But in July and August, it's anybody's game. Like, who knows?
Yeah. How do you see the theater in general and the Cape Playhouse in particular? How do you have a vision for how it can be an agent of social change or enhanced social awareness?
Absolutely. And in a way, that's the agenda that's taken me through from when I was a graduate student, thinking about what to do as a young gay man in a world that was just coming out of the AIDS crisis, and how might theater do something meaningful to advance a cause. That's why we called the theater About Face. We meant we're going to turn this around. And it was unapologetically militant in its theme, in a sense that we were not going to continue in the way that the culture had been moving, and that we're going to take our place as citizens, as theater artists, citizens. That idea has followed me for the last 3 decades, that theater artists play a pivotal role in shaping the immediate emotional experience of our audience, which, as the Greeks will tell you, is directly related to how the body politic works. That when we say theater is the origin of democracy, it is a place where people come together and think and feel the same thoughts and the same ideas, and share a laugh or a cry or an idea in a way that is felt, that is non-replicable, that is unique to the instant that it's happening. And it's thrilling when you feel that work. What I've learned as I've gotten older is that doesn't just mean experimental work, and it doesn't just mean new plays with political agendas, and it doesn't just mean work in which an argument is being put forward, but it also means that joy is a political tool. You know what I mean? That a room full of people who've shared a live experience with each other and laughed and cried and stood up and applauded is a unique time for human connection, which increasingly we understand is necessary to our humanity and fundamental if we're going to survive the moment, is that connection is our only way forward, and that theater creates connection in a profound way that can't be done in the movies. It can't be done on your phone. It can't be done in conversation. It needs to be in a room with other human beings, and we've needed it since the origin of the theater in 3,000 years ago. And that to me is very political.
Yeah. It's about community building, it seems to me.
Community feeling.
Yeah. And sort of creating this organic experience that everybody shares in collectively at a performance. And, I have to say, I thought, I said to my husband, John, when we saw Hairspray, I thought it was really smart and inviting that you come out at the start of these shows to basically invite people in. Because I think sometimes the theater suffers from a reputation of not being for everybody.
Yeah. Someone asked me, a friend of mine who is not a theater person was coming to the Cape my first summer, and she said, an older person, and she said, well, can I come to the theater? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, is it like a club, or is it like can I come? And I've always thought, that we have to throw open our doors as wide as possible, and that the best thing about the theater is the fully democratic experience, that everyone in that room is the same once the lights go out, and has the same eyes and the same ears and the same heartbeat. And that is radically inclusive if you make it so. And so in a way, that kind of welcome to our party feeling that I offer in these curtain speeches is meant to have people look at each other and realize that they're connected to people that are strangers to them, and that there's a warmth to Cape Cod. There's a warmth to this theater that is very different than going to a Broadway show. And in which I feel like Broadway shows, the ushers are mean and the battle traffic to get there, and you just spent $250 on a ticket, and it can be, you're in an adverse situation to begin with, and you don't necessarily feel super connected to the people around you. And my job at the Playhouse is to make sure that everyone feels welcomed and ready to listen to what we're offering. And sometimes that work is Hairspray and it's a blast, but has a really intense political message. And sometimes that work is Into the Woods, which is emotionally harrowing. It's that show is such a gut punch. You think it's like this hilarious romp, and then suddenly it's about the most profound mortal experiences and the biggest questions we have as human beings. What is life for? What is tragedy for? Why do we suffer? And how do we overcome through narrative? And, to have the shows back to back is sort of what I'm doing. So like, welcome to the party, and also welcome to being alive.
We'll talk a little bit about how you chose the particular mix of shows this year and what is still upcoming after Hairspray.
Yeah, well, I wanted to make a season. I make a joke in the speech that, I created a season of musical comedy because we need joy right now, and we need comedy, and we need to laugh, and we need to release. And also I chose shows, like Into the Woods and Hairspray, that have some teeth to them, right? You can't watch Hairspray and not think about the intense segregation of her moment. You can't watch Hairspray in that audience and not think how many more people of color there are on stage than there are in the audience, right? There's an asterisk to the experience. And it's true about musical comedies, for example, that we think they are hilarious, and then something really rough happens in the second act that puts the characters in distress and in crisis, and that has to be resolved. And Shakespeare knew this, right? Shakespeare's comedies are, if you look about Much Ado About Nothing, the nothing about which there's much ado is terrifying. Like, that girl's going to get killed if they don't resolve the misunderstanding, that there's stakes. And that's what I try to find, were shows in which even the most comedic surface belies something profoundly human. For example, in the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, the character Olive, the daughter who's been lost to her parents and is profoundly alone, there's a really yawning gap between the laughs in Spelling Bee and the real pathos of what childhood is and what childhood loss is. And that's what makes it a great show, right? So I try to find shows that both meet that moment of we're providing joy, but also have a heart. And that's this collection of shows. I think I'll do that.
Yeah. And do any of the actors, when you cast them, do they appear in multiple shows, or is every cast different?
Every cast is different, though we do now have some sort of usual suspects who have, I think this year there are 5 people who have done shows in all 3 seasons. And we have designers who've done multiple shows, and there's a sense of ensemble or community that's very nascent to my upbringing in Chicago, where that sense of community and tribe was so important to our identity as theater artists. By which I mean Chicago is a town of theater companies, and in the 90s and 2000s, you sort of found your company, and that is how you built a sense of community and engagement, was with your fellow artists in your company. And the Playhouse will never be that kind of place, but there is joy in having people back, and joy for our audience in knowing, like, oh, I saw that person last year in this show, but also these shows are getting bigger and bigger, and we have more and more contracts. So it's just the community is growing every year by a lot.
When we saw Hairspray, the first thing I always notice in a show is the choreography, and then the music, the singing. and then the acting. And I'm kind of curious, when you think about the components, the elements in putting on a production, what are the hardest components to really bring to bear and to bring to stage?
I didn't used to think this, but I have turned around that the only thing that is irreducible in the theater is the actor. It is the audience's primary relationship is with the human beings on stage, and casting is the most essential part of what I do. And shows that are brilliantly cast are usually really good, and shows where there is a casting problem, that's often where it starts. But what I feel in the theater as an audience member is a connection with both the acting ability of the person pretending to be someone else and the extraordinary human talent that they possess to, in a musical, to sing, to dance, to pretend to be someone else all at the same time. That they have to be an extraordinary singer is a really incredible thing to be. I wish I was. To be able to dance like that is an incredible thing. We experience the fullness of a human being's talent. And if you have 26 of them, we experience the fullness of 26 human beings' talent in a small room in which we are both marveling at the athleticism and the capacity of our own mind to pretend with that person that they are somewhere else and being something else, and to get lost in story, right? That's to me the joy of the theater. And all the other elements, the design, everything that I love so much about the execution means nothing if the actor is not exactly right.
And the athleticism, as you say, I mean, the singing and the dancing. And I think one of the things I'm always aware of when I go to a show is just the complexity of the choreography. I mean, how do you map that out and block that?
Magic.
Yeah. So you're coming up on the 2027 centennial. Yeah. So what are your plans? What are you thinking of bringing to us next year?
Oh, I could tell you that, but I'd have to kill you.
Oh, okay. Well, give us a few things to noodle on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal for me is I'm creating a season, and we're in the middle of it right now, that is both retrospective, that all the projects reflect on a different era in the Playhouse's history and a different era in the last 100 years of theater, and that have a sense of celebration, right? That my goal for next season is that it's huge, even bigger than this season, and that it's not unmissable. You know, that I want you to have to fight to get a ticket. That's my dream. And that it makes the gains the theater has seen in the last couple of years permanent, right? Because it feels like the Playhouse, because it's booming, that now we're on a path of inevitability towards some prosperous future. And I remind us every day that the theater was almost closed 7 years ago. And that there's nothing that's going to keep us from that outcome if we don't build this thing while we have the wind at our backs. So every project has the heavy lift of advancing our relationship with our audience, so by the end, the audience knows and fully appreciates the history of the place and the magic of it, but also can see the next 20 or 30 years and has a trust that we're here for the long haul.
Well, to that point, how do you, as an artistic director, how do you balance the tension between creative hopes and aspirations and commercial realities of bringing people in for a good performance, a good time, and something that is financially robust enough to support such work?
That is what keeps me up at 2 a.m. It's the hardest thing to do, is to figure out how do you balance the artistry and the commerce of it in this job. And it was a very different issue in regional theaters, which are much more funded or much more subsidized. I spent much more of my time. I used to spend so much more of my time raising money. And now I spend so much more of my time thinking about how to earn money, meaning how to sell tickets. And so it's a different challenge, which to me is still really interesting, because it's not how I ever worked in my previous 2 theaters or in my career as a director or as a writer. So I don't know if I'm going to run out of shows that I'm interested in. I find it joyful that I can go back to shows that I loved when I was a kid and think about, what made me fall in love with theater in the first place. And it was always musical theater, and it was some of the greatest shows, and the chance to say, I could do any of those. There's really nothing we can't do. And hopefully that thing that made me, when I'd go to see shows when I was a kid, the second act would start and I would start crying because I didn't want it to end. And in finding that thing.
You were hooked.
Yeah, I was hooked. I was from a very young age. And I think that's what I look for are things that I will want to see again and again. In a way, we can't do a show in the season that I'm not willing to watch 5 times.
Well, in addition to being artistic director at the Cape Playhouse, you're also a husband and a parent and a dad. So let's pivot and talk a little bit about what it's like. You and Clay are both working in a field where schedules are tight and time is often in short supply. So how do you all balance what you do, what he does, and what you want to create at home with your son?
Oh, gosh. To me, because being a gay dad, we have to really intend to do it. I think we had our son through surrogacy. It took years and every dollar we had, and we're not rich people. And, it took a lot of intention to create this extraordinary, magical little guy. And absolutely our primary goal in our lives is to make sure that he has the best possible life. And the theater for both of us and our careers have to be second to the moral responsibility we had in creating a human being. He didn't choose to get born. He didn't know he was going to have 2 theater dads. So we try as much as we can to make sure that his life is as normal as possible. And that means giving up on some things. There are things that we'd like to do that we don't do. Certainly as he's getting older, we're feeling more and more like that we're now less like in the moment of he'll be 9 next month, and that he's becoming his own person and is more self-sufficient. And now we're trying to model for him what it means to have careers and lives with work that we actually love and are deeply passionate about. And I think that's what we try to model for him is I don't care what he is. I don't care what he does. I just want him to care about his work as much as I care about mine, and care about his relationships as much as we care about ours. And that's the challenge. Now, it is really hard. Clay got cast in Little Shop of Horrors off Broadway about a month before the season started, and we had to totally change our plan. And it meant, Bo was having this weird summer where he's jumping back and forth from the Cape to New York, and Clay and I have seen each other, 6 days in the last 6 weeks, and it's challenging, but we're doing it. And it's the best thing about the theater is it's always temporary. You know what I mean? These aren't jobs we're locked into for years. This is what we're doing right now. And I know that this season will end and we're back in New York, and then I'm going off to London to have a show that I've written that's happening in London in October, and then that'll be over. But they all have in our lives a very short horizon. In the life of a child, that's a long time, right? A month is a long time. A summer is a long time. So that's what we wrestle with. But I think making sure that he feels secure, that he knows how loved he is, and that he experiences his kind of, he's a very magical childhood. He goes to school in Manhattan, summers on the Cape, travels all over the place. His passport is 3 times more booked than mine was when I was 30. He gets to have amazing experiences, and that's what we're doing.
That's wonderful to hear. And so in terms of how you and Clay tag team, who does what in your house?
Whatever I say, he's going to disagree with. So we have a very egalitarian relationship. That there are things that he's great at that I'm not great at, which are the building things and planning experiences, and I'm good at producing our lives. And that I plan the deadlines, and I know exactly what's happening every day of every week. And in the way that I can run a theater company, I can run our family, or the logistics of our family, and that's, I think,
the household administrator, it sounds like.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, yeah, Clay would say that's not true, but he would agree that I'm in charge of the calendar. I know day by day, week by week, what's happening, and can therefore look ahead and think, how do we prepare for what's 3 weeks from now or 3 months from now, versus the structure of how you get through a day is a different skill set.
Yeah. So your son's name is Bo, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I were to ask Bo, of his 2 dads, who would he say is the softer touch?
I can't answer that, Rick.
Who does he go to if he wants something?
I can't answer that either. I'm going to get in trouble. Yeah, tomorrow's my wedding anniversary, so I'll be the 5th.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I don't know. I'm 10 years older than Clay, and I think that I have a different. Oh, I don't know. I mean, Clay would say he's more strict and I'm less strict, and I don't know that I agree. I also manage people for a living, And in a way, I'm sort of managing the family and figuring out how to get people what they want and what they need in ways that avoid conflict and keep controversy to a minimum. And we just have very different styles in terms of how we navigate that part of our parenting.
Yeah, I get it, because John and I have our differences as well, complementary aspects. Well, to that point, do you think that your experience as a gay man has influenced the way you lead people in an artistic endeavor?
Absolutely. And I think that both in how I express my political identity as a gay man and the ways in which I lead from a much more, I don't know, I'm in a field where like I'm always surrounded by straight men who do what I do, who are generally all a foot and a half taller than me, and not a foot and a half, but like tall straight men lead in a very different way than I lead, and I lead from a very empathic and inclusive and cohesive and unifying perspective, that I'm building teams and I'm building collaboration and I'm building a sense of community that is really related to not liking being bullied when I was a kid. That hierarchical ways of thinking and leading were always really traumatizing for me when I was young. And that doesn't mean I don't make big decisions and I don't set the rules, because I do. But my goal is that everyone in a cast, everyone on the teams that I build and that I work with feels ownership and collective responsibility for outcomes. I don't know, in a way, to me, that's a very gay guy thing to care about. Really rooted in childhood trauma, really rooted in the feeling of exclusion and otherness and not having a place at the table and not having a community. It's been so important to me in my entire adult life to build egalitarian and equal and shared leadership models that can empower people.
Were you bullied as a child?
Oh, of course. Who wasn't?
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I had a very rough childhood. I was a child of divorce, and there was a lot of violence in my family and a lot of kind of there was sometimes a lot of poverty and sometimes not. And when my parents split, they had very different lives. And so it wasn't just being bullied in school, because I was, but also just faced a tremendous amount of adversity that is itself, a big reason of how I am, what I am is, it's a really rough childhood. And probably it's a more fair question to say what I'm doing as a parent is trying to atone for and heal from that trauma by building a childhood for Bo that is the opposite of mine. And but like I'm half Jewish, half Southern Baptist. My mom was from the South. My dad's from Baltimore, and had a very chaotic marriage. And I was always either in the South or in the North. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, but also in Connecticut. And like when I was in the North, I was Southern. When I was in the South, I was Northern. When I was in Jewish spaces, I was not Jewish. When I was in non-Jewish spaces, I was Jewish. And in all those places, I was this little queer kid who loved the theater in a world that was not to the manner born. In my freshman year of high school, I was in rural North Carolina in a town of maybe 2,000 people. And the idea that I was running around trying to make theater in this little redneck town in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, can give you a good sense of what that was like, being a total alien to the world that I was born into, and yet had access through some family miracles that I also had access to a stepmother who took me to the theater in New York, who had grandparents, her parents, who really loved arts and culture and took me to the opera. And, so I would go from like 1 week in this tiny, crappy, awful little town in rural North Carolina, and the next week be on winter break and sing a Broadway show was, part of what gave me a sense of what the theater can do and how the theater can save us. Is that's probably ruled my life more than I've ever really thought about. But the theater did save me from a lot of trauma.
Thank you for that. That's exactly what the actor Lawrence Luckinbill told me last week. He grew up in an experience of poverty with alcoholism, and he found a refuge in the theater and a community in the theater. And it strikes me that what you experienced as a queer kid being bullied and as an outsider made you very intentional about how you lead people and create not just an ensemble, but really an environment of inclusiveness.
Yeah. I think that people respond to trauma in different ways, right? Because you can also see examples, say like, oh, that person is a bad person or a jerk because they had a bad childhood. And I think what I've really set out to do in a very conscious way is to say, I had a really awful childhood and I really want to make that into an experience that makes the world better for other people. And in doing so, that I'm able to heal some things that could have ruined my life and didn't.
You reinvented yourself.
Yeah.
And kind of transformed yourself. So wonderful answers, Eric. Is there anything, I've asked you a lot of questions, is there anything that's kind of percolated up as we've been talking that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I'm very thoughtful about the focus of this project for you in terms of LGBTQ moment profiles in courage, that it's interesting for me to think about my own path from being I used to say that I was a professional gay in the 90s and 2000s, that's I only worked in LGBTQ spaces and was in Chicago, was really focused exclusively on how to advance our cause. And then sometimes I felt that in leaving that and running a big regional and now running, kind of a Tony theater in a leafy beach town, that those things feel different. And it's interesting to think about the ways in which those impulses that we have in coming out of the AIDS crisis and coming out of the move for equality in the 90s and into gay marriage and into a large chunk of time where we thought we were done, right? I remember people used to say to me in the early 2000s, like, do we need an about face? Do we need a queer theater? Aren't we done with that? And I was like, no, we're not out of the woods.
No.
And now as we've returned to real struggles, that being in this much more heterogeneous world, that we are continuing to articulate those same values. When I look at all the queer kids who work at the Playhouse, and we have a huge number of young people running things, and they have different gender identities and different pronouns and different ways of expressing who they are, and that they find that in our theater, the same safe space that I was craving when I was a kid, and that led me to want to start About Face in the beginning. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about the ways in which that origin story is connected to what I'm doing right now, but it is everywhere. And it's very satisfying to think about how we, in different phases of our life, bring the political struggle to our work in ways that hopefully are making a difference.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap today by giving you a chance to offer your sales pitch to our listeners. What are the options in terms of attending the theater? Can you talk a little bit about membership, subscribership, those kinds of things? What are the options for people who are interested in investing time in a local theatrical setting?
Yeah, I mean, I think what theaters need, and what we need more than anything, are people to come out of not a sense of obligation, but out of real love, and building theaters in which our audiences are voting with their time to participate is the most important and meaningful thing. And for us, that means the Playhouse. I hope you'll come if you're on the Cape. I hope if you're not on the Cape, you'll come visit and experience the magic of that really wonderful place. Our season runs from 1st of June until end of September, and we do holiday programming in the fall and winter. And it is the most meaningful thing to us to see a full house every night, and it's so satisfying. I'm realizing that the thing I didn't talk about was probably the most important thing to me right now is if you're in London in October, I have a musical called Stoker Wilde that's about the rivalry between Bram Stoker and Oscar Wilde that I'm working on, that has a week-long run at Wilton's Music Hall on the East End the last week of October. So that's a way you can participate in my life, is to come check out Stoker Wilde, which is so cool.
I may come over to see that. Meanwhile, if people want to know more about subscribership, where do they go online?
CapePlayhouse.com. Easy breezy.
Well, Eric Rosen, I want to thank you for your time today. It's really been an interesting conversation about the world of theater and the arts. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you for listening to today's interview. Founded in 1973, PFLAG is the first and largest organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and their parents, families, friends, and allies. We have over 400 chapters and more than 200,000 members and supporters nationwide. Our members come from every generation and live in cities, small towns, and rural areas across the United States. PFLAG is committed to creating a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed. For more information about PFLAG, explore the rest of this website or visit PFLAG National at pflag.org.